It's 7 o'clock. So welcome everybody. We've got our first presenter here is Jack. He's talking about disaster deployments. So Jack Smith, KE4LWT. Jack, are you ready?
Yes, I am.
All right, why don't you take it away?
So this is about disaster deployments, and it's my experiences and observations from the field. That's how to contact me if you need to. And I've got to give this disclaimer because I work for the government. So the views expressed in this presentation are solely those of the author and do not reflect the views of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, Department of Homeland Security, or the U.S. government. And some of the background documents that go into emergency communications and deployment are the National Incident Management System, the Emergency Support Functions, ESF2, Communications Infrastructure, and 6, Mass Care, the supporting memorandum of understanding between agencies and organizations. And these are just some of the deployments that I've done. And I'm just going to skip through them pretty quick because these are just the big ones. And I'm currently deployed to North Carolina for COVID response. So in deployment, some of the challenges that we have. The big one is an austere environment. Disasters, emergencies, and even planned events require operating from either ad hoc facilities or facilities that are not normally intended for emergency operations. In this photo, that 10 by 10 Walmart pop-up on the roof was my office for several weeks and my hotel room for a few nights when I first got to Puerto Rico. Unfamiliar organizational structures. The organizations you'll find yourself working with will have a structure that you will be unfamiliar with no matter how many times you've worked with them in the past. Emergency communications support is never the same as you practice. There are just too many variables. Having said that, a competent trained operator will have no difficulties in this environment. Evolving or devolving communication systems. The needs are always changing.
No, not yet.
As the situation develops, it could get better, worse, more consolidated, or more dispersed. The only thing constant is change. Safety and security. Your safety and security are paramount. Without the communications you provide, the mission will not succeed, or at least not as well. If you have any concerns with your safety or security, relay that to the appropriate source. Usually there will be a site safety and security officer. That would be your starting point. Keep in mind, however, that some risks that are taken during emergency operations are calculated ones, and there may be no way to completely render a situation safe. Pre-deployment. Our first responsibility is to our families and then to our own safety. If you see that you may not be able to deploy due to a family situation, then make sure you inform your deployment coordinator of that as soon as possible. Self-evaluation. Your own safety and health are equally important. If you have any accessible and functional needs, such as mobility restrictions, special dietary needs, or need for electrical power devices, power for devices such as oxygen concentrators or CPAP machines, again, make sure your deployment coordinator knows these. You may still be able to be deployed with limitations. The time to bring this up is not when you arrive at your mobilization station. Training. Are you capable and confident in what tasks you may be assigned? If not, perhaps taking the first couple of shifts with another operator who is may be an excellent training opportunity. Do not place yourself in a situation that you're not entirely comfortable with. That only hurts the mission, the survivors, and the group you represent. Also, maintain a binder with your ARRL training task book, DHS Auxiliary Communications Position Task Book, license, and any references you may need. Make sure you understand how to read an ICS 205 radio communications plan, the -205 Alpha Communications List phone book, -207 organization chart, the -214 activity log, 211 check-in list. It's also helpful to at least be familiar with the ICS Form 204 assignment list, the 206 medical plan. Work with the served agencies at your location to know who message traffic for them will go to. It's not necessarily the same for all agencies at a given location. One example of that would be in VDEM's case, the state is broken down into 7 regions which ARRL is aligned to match. However, other organizations such as the Red Cross may not match that. The Virginia VOADs, for example, they have a different geographic breakdown. So as information goes up, it may go slightly different depending on what organization that traffic is being sent for. Readiness. This is more than just having a radio and a license. It's also physical and mental readiness. Being able to work long hours, often with little or no rest breaks, is very common in the early days of a disaster. Human resources are short, and relief may not be possible with the personnel available. Additionally, it is inevitable that you will encounter survivors who want to tell you their stories. This is extremely emotional in ways that I just can't explain. You can and should practice by participating in local events, road races, parades, etc., to build the technical experience, and consider periodically practicing in the field with your deployment kit to confirm its operation. Things like Parks on the Air, Winter Field Day, and to a lesser extent, Traditional Field Day are all excellent opportunities to refine your loadout and operations under austere conditions. Deployment kit. I recommend using a modular system and having checklists. Showing up without the needed items puts you in a position where you're now another mouth to feed. Don't put your agency in the situation where they're having to support you beyond what had been agreed to in the MOUs. Your organization may have a standing list, but frequently the requesting agency will issue one as well. In these cases, add anything not on one to the other unless it is specifically listed as a do not bring. And I'll give you an example of that one real quick. The agency I work for, we're not even allowed to bring a pocket knife. I know that sounds crazy. What does someone use for tools? The people who operate the MCOVs, the mobile communications office vehicles, they usually have, the pocket knives and razor knives and things like that are part of their toolkit, but they have to be in their tool bag. They can't, they're supplied with the vehicle. They can't bring them with them. Notification. Have a solid plan for how to receive notification from your deployment manager. This may be multiple systems such as text message, a monitor repeater, or simplex channel, or as a last resort, a strip map to your home for in-person notifications when other systems fail. Now we're ready to deploy. So deployment. Step 1, do not self-deploy. There's no notes to go with that one. Report to the directed facility. It's highly recommended that everyone report to a single point for final checks, mission briefing, etc. There may be instances where you may be directed to go directly to a given location, but these should be rare and prearranged well in advance. Capabilities. Bring the capabilities needed. November 5 Tango India Mike John Galvin has an excellent resource typing system that is NIMS compliant. That's the National Incident Management System, and provides a template for bringing the resources required for a given mission. Your deployment manager should tell you what capabilities are required for the duties you'll be performing. Generally speaking, don't bring more than needed unless directed to do so. It's not unusual to have to rapidly evacuate operational facilities due to continuing hazards. On every disaster I've worked, I've had to redeploy in just a few hours' notice at most, often hundreds of miles. While you most likely won't have to go that far, it isn't unusual for fires, floods, hazmat, or even security incidents to shift toward your facility. Self-care. Take care of yourself, but don't wait until the last minute to let your chain of command know that you may need relief. With planning, this can be mitigated and everyone can get the rest they need. Keep in mind that normal operational periods are 12 hours or multiples of that, and all planning done by the emergency management team is based on a 12 to 24-hour operational period. Relief. As I mentioned before, relief is normally based on a 12-hour work period. If possible, multiple operators should be assigned to manage the workflow and also to allow for meal, toilet, and rest breaks. One example would be, let's just say you have, say, 2 shelters and a communications hub all within a few miles of each other. That would really be a good instance where a 4th operator would come in handy with appropriate transportation to be able to go between them to give people, a little bit of relief so that they could take a meal break, toilet break, etc. Reassignment. As the situation evolves, there may be more or less need for communication support at a location. As such, it's necessary to be ready to either consolidate operations or to relocate. Make sure your communications unit lead, COML, or other similarly responsible person knows how much communication support you are actually supplying. Don't make a decision on your own to redeploy. This is a task that the COML and the planning section, together with the incident command team, must take. Additional notes. While deployed, develop a method for tracking what you use and what you do not use. I carry a duffel bag with me, and every time I use something, I place it in the duffel bag. I also place any items that I consider safety essential items in there as well. Things like my first aid kit, gloves, whatever. Even though I may not have used them, that's something that's an essential. So it's going to go in that duffel bag for the next time. Doing that enables me to refine my loadout to just what's needed and not carry excess items around on future deployments. Keep notes on what worked and what didn't work. This will enable you to write clear and concise after-action reports to assist your group with future deployments. Post-deployment. Do not self-demobilize. Just as deployments are planned and methodical, so are demobilizations. Signing out. You may be required to go through a formal checkout process, and I highly encourage this. Collect up the ICS Forms 214 activity log, -211 incident check-in list, and other forms that were used, and provide the originals to the documentation section or other designated person. If you were using WinLink, generate the ICS 309 communications log and provide that as well. Ask for a copy of the format of the after-action report document so that you can begin working on that as quickly as possible. Also request any feedback or evaluations at this time. My agency does not allow us to demobilize without these being completed. Self-assessment. We all have things we can improve upon, and deployments really bring those to the surface. Identify the top 2 or 3 and then work on improving them. It could be that you need to improve the way you load out, or maybe just your documentation skills need polishing. Self-care again. Depressurizing and getting back to normal are important, but in the event of a large-scale disaster, you may never be the same, and that's not a bad thing. Seek out coworkers, faith-based leaders, or others, depending on your belief system, and talk about what you've seen, whether it be in the field or at the deployment site. Make sure that the people you're talking to about your experiences are comfortable with that. And depending on what you experienced, it can be traumatic for them as well, just to even hear what you've been through and what you've seen. Reset. This is where you go through your loadout and refine your packing list. Repair or replace anything damaged or depleted, and clean up your packing list. Your packing list will never be perfect, but you do need to refine it and keep it handy. What I do is print a new one after every deployment, including the changes I've made. I break it down into each module for my modular packing system and put those in the modules in a document protector. That way, when I'm in a rush to load out and leave, I have the ability to check each section off individually and get them ready to go. Having this broken down into smaller sections also reduces the stress considerably. The system I talked about earlier, where I filtered into items into what was used, what is essential, and what was not, really comes into play here. Some observations. Infrastructure overload. The existing infrastructure systems are built with very little extra capacity, and even in emergency services communications. Typically, they're designed around a maximum capacity seen in X amount of time. A good example of this would be sporting events where the cellular providers bring in mobile towers to temporarily add capacity. And large disasters, there usually aren't enough of these systems to go around. Infrastructure outages. Infrastructure relies on power, fuel, and support. Again, during large disasters, many of these will go offline pretty quickly, usually within 24 hours as fuel runs out. In many cases, the same things that are keeping the responders occupied are the same things that are keeping these from being refueled with services. Tanker trucks and support personnel can't drive through fires, floods, deep snow, or debris any more than we can. Remote operations. In remote locations, there may not have been enough infrastructure to support large operations to begin with. Amateur radio can be that bridge that brings in communications to those areas in order to support the survivors and the responders alike. Situational awareness. One of the most overlooked things that an amateur radio operator can do is provide situational awareness to those in the fields. This can be in the form of weather reports, road conditions, operating hours, or other things that may be of use to the other amateur radio operators in the field, but that also can be passed along to the survivors and responders. For example, when I was in California, everything was posted on community bulletin boards because all the communications infrastructure was down. So everything came into one communications center, was gathered up. The local Indian nation, they provided a printer. They copied everything, and we carried it around and we put it up at every building, every place where the community might go, the post office, the grocery store, the gas pumps, any place where things like that would be important. Insufficient utilization. If you have the ability to help with other tasks, do so if you're asked. If you have a particular skill set, such as American Sign Language, second spoken language, database wizard, etc., make sure you let that be known. They know that your primary duty is as a communicator, and that takes priority. Having said that, someone just sitting around the EOC, Emergency Operations Center, or the Incident Command Post, ICP, or other location just gives a bad vibe. There have been many times that I've helped load trucks, unload trucks, pushed wheelchairs, or even helped roll up fire hoses. That's nowhere near my job description, but if I can do it and help the responders, help the survivors, then that's what I do. A note on the photo. That's a young lady from the North Valley Animal Disaster Group. She's helping to evacuate a koi pond. That's why the fish net in her hand. The radio she's carrying was issued by the state radio cache, but that service could just as easily, and I believe more quickly, been provided by an amateur radio group. And indeed, in many areas that I was working in, that service was being provided by amateur radio groups. And a special note concerning emergency communications. That's legally defined as to provide essential communications in connection with the immediate safety of human life and immediate protection of property when normal communication systems are not available. This, of course, includes sending, receiving, and relaying distress communications. Communications during an emergency or disaster. That's pretty much my entire life. All other communications during a disaster. The vast majority of these are not emergency communications, and all rules are still in effect. And now I'm open for your questions, comments.
Can I make a comment?
Go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, Jack. This is Brian, N1BJF. As a former MERS, Maynard MERS person, let me tell you, your comments are spot on. Great comments. You've captured it in a nutshell. The only thing I could emphasize is readiness. Mundane things like dental appointments, have your medications if you need medications. When the call comes, that's not the time to go get stuff ready.
Hey,
go ahead.
Brian, you are absolutely right. And by the way, one thing to go with what Brian just said, when I was in Puerto Rico, I learned the hard way that when you're deploying into an area that's outside of your normal area, you need to call your insurance company before you go there and see where you can go. I wound up in the emergency room twice while I was in Puerto Rico, and that was besides the language barrier, just finding a hospital that was operational was a challenge because they told me to go to one, and I told them, I said, I think the last time that one had been updated was when the Spanish were running Puerto Rico. I really didn't want to go there. And so then they gave me another one. I said, well, on a good day, that's a 4-hour drive, and today it's impossible. So, you need to have all that information before you go there, because when communications aren't up and running and you're sick or you've gotten a nail gun fired into your foot or something like that, that kind of stuff is really important to have available. So now I've got to where I add that to my packing list, where I have a card that has my insurance company's different regions, so I can reach back and see where to go.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jack.
So how long have you been doing this?
Well, do you mean emergency communications or emergency response?
Yes.
1983.
Beautiful.
We have a question in the chat at the moment. This is how does 5G and the AT&T First Alert capability, how is it going to affect EmComm?
Not really a whole lot from what I've seen. Some agencies have that, but you've got to look at who the primary people supported by amateur radio are. And if you break out a copy of your ESF6 mass care, and I tell people all the time, just do a Control F and search COMMUNIC. Search that, that partial word and see how many times communicating comes up. And the organization tasked to provide communications to those volunteer organizations active in disaster is amateur radio. And very few of us ever practice that. And, we seem to always wrap our head around trying to support the government sector. They're going to have the Virginia radio cache or the National Capital Region radio cache or North or South Carolina or California or whoever radio cache there, usually within hours, to provide that communication to support to those government agencies. However, groups like Team Rubicon, the Baptist Disaster Group, Salvation Army, all these others, they do not have that ability to have a hub and spoke type communication system that reaches back to the EOC. So they're the ones that are not going to have that. And they do not have 5G access. They don't have access to FirstNet. They may have some limited access to it, but that's usually going to be, I'm going to use the example of the Red Cross. That will be their like their regional or county office person, and that'll be it. So when they bring in all those volunteers or they start staffing up these shelters, there's just not going to be stuff. The Red Cross does have what they call a black box kit, which is a portable satellite communication system and VoIP phones that they bring in and set up at the shelters. But they don't have a whole lot of those. So in a large disaster, they're going to run out of those.
One other question, I think you had mentioned a little bit, kind of how to get involved and what to do. You could maybe just recap that for a second.
Sure. Well, for one thing, I would just look in, for anyone who's interested in getting into disaster response of any flavor, the best way to start, in my mind, is looking at the national volunteer organizations active in disaster and seeing which one of those groups kind of fits your, fits what you want to do. One example I would use is in a lot of the areas that were destroyed by fires in California, the Lions Club was very active. And, normally we associate them with doing, eyewear and stuff like that. That's not what they were doing. They were actually out purchasing well systems, pumps, pressure tanks, all the electrical stuff, because most homes in rural California are on wells, and their wells had been destroyed in the fire. So in order to get those lots available so that different emergency management groups or volunteer groups could provide those people some kind of temporary shelter, usually like an RV or a modular home or something like that, you have to have water before they'll put those in. You have to have working utilities, or they won't let you put that facility on there. So the Lions Club was doing well repair. And then, of course, like the North Valley Animal Disaster Group that I mentioned, in Virginia, there's the Louisa County Animal Rescue Team. They're a very good group. And by the way, while you're there, mention that you're an amateur radio operator and you can help them figure out how to communicate back to the EOC. But that's what we're supposed to be doing anyway. That we should be interacting at the VOAD level and selling that. So the county probably has an equivalent of the state VOAD that you could interact with.
Well, this has been great, Jack. We really appreciate this. Thank you so much. Excellent presentation. Really excellent to have this. So, Jack, are you going to be here for a little bit longer?
I can be if you want me to.
Okay. So usually we have a second presentation, and then at the end of the evening, we do sometimes have a bit more discussion. So if you're willing and wanting, you're more than welcome to stick around.
I can do that. And while you're having your business meeting, I'll take the furry kids out for a walk.